Okay, that's a great question. Like, like I was saying, one of these packets is good for 5 gallons, but if you put all of it, which it's $1 or something, so not that much, into 1 gallon, it's definitely going to go faster. It's definitely going to reproduce quicker. And so that is like in a pinch, especially, if you don't have time to prime it, like I was saying, put it in a little sweet liquid for 15 minutes and kind of let it reproduce that way and wake up, and you might add a little bit more than a fifth of the package to a gallon into the primary to make sure that, especially like I end up making a lot of meads on the go. Like I just like start a class like this and then I'm like in the bay like the next day, and I really want to make sure it goes, and I don't have time to see, if it starts bubbling or not. So then I might add like, a whole packet to a gallon versus like just a fifth. So another thing is acids, you'll see like all sorts of acids and vials, tartaric acid is famous for grapes, malic acid from apples and various other fruits within that family, as well as gooseberries and rhubarb, and citric acid, of course, from citrus. Initially when I started, I got those just to have them on tap, but then I realized, well, why don't I just add things that have acid into, my tea? And so I don't tend to like use any of those like kind of store-bought container.
What's the purpose of the acid?
Okay, that's a good question. So, when most people are crafting a beverage like this, they basically want it to be as complex as possible. They want there to be a beginning note, a middle note, and a finishing note, and also like highs and lows as well. And so the acid is just kind of, you think of it as like an instrument in the choir, It is like, you've got your wind instruments and your wood instruments and your brass, and so
And
the
time
acid.
also. As
What?
an element, time as an element in the flavor.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And so the acids, are something that a lot of people really appreciate, though, in a flavor profile of something that they're drinking. And that tartness, is a way to get at that. And then another thing, which is actually a type of acid, but has its own category here, are tannins. And so, most famous in aging wine in oak casks, or aging whiskey in oak casks, what they're doing is getting the tannins out of that oak. But tannins are probably one of the most ubiquitous plant compounds in the world. So they're in grape leaves, actually. You can use oak chips, and various other things. Geraniums, for instance, have tannins. Raspberry leaves have tannins. That's like the medicinal aspect, of raspberry leaves, for instance, for like pregnancy teas and that sort of thing, is the astringency. So that's once again another note in your choir, is this astringency that comes from tannins. It's different than the tartness that comes from other acids. Another thing you've got are clearing agents. If you absolutely want it to be crystal clear, then once it's done, you can add stuff to it that will like really make everything settle to the bottom. So you could add bentonite clay, for instance. I've heard of eggshells being used, and then there's enzymes as well. And in particular, this is kind of important. If you heat up fruit too high, then you're going to engage the pectin that's in there, and pectin is basically what makes jelly and jam, right? So that's going to affect for sure the clarity and potentially even the mouthfeel of your product. And so there's an enzyme, pectin enzyme, that will break down that pectin. But what I tend to do is just not, I think it's right around that point of sterilization, so 150, 160 is the cutoff before you're going to engage the pectin. And what I tend to do is just not heat up my fruit beyond that. But if you were to boil your fruit, then you'll definitely like engage that pectin, and you might want to add an enzyme to it if you want it to be clear after that.
When would you add that in?
I think it's pretty much right away. I haven't done it in quite a while though, so it's a few years since I've done that, but you just kind of follow the directions, and I think it's pretty much right away. So yeah, you can see an artifact of how I've been transitioning just in the last few weeks, where it says prime starter culture is not necessary with fresh yeast, and I've certainly had like, good results, like I said, of like having your sweet liquid here below 100 degrees, ideally more like 90, and then just pitching it straight from the packet in there. But if it's going to be really cold, where this stuff is going to be living, or you're going to be going away and not able to make sure that it actually engaged, then having a starter culture, I think, is really good. Another thing is that you would tend to keep this stuff in the refrigerator. And ironically, I've seen it that way in like probably 10 brew supply stores all across the country, and now I was in Florida, and their brew supply store, it's all just out there, like at room temperature in one of the hotter places in the country. And so if that happened to be you too, or you were traveling and you brought it along with you, you know, in the car, you wanted to bring it to, you know, your parents' place to make a Christmas brew or something, and it was warm in the car, that might decrease the viability of it, and that might be another reason to put in a starter culture to kind of get it a little bit more primed versus like, if it was like pretty new, like within the last few weeks to a couple months, and stored in the refrigerator where it pretty much stays dormant and very vital. So we already talked about temperature. Stuck fermentation is when it stops bubbling before it's eaten all of the sweetness that it's capable of. And so at that point, you could actually add more culture to it. If you wanted, you could just raise the temperature up and see if it just re-engages the culture that's already there. Or you could just drink it sweet, which is all, you know, viable thing. Speaking of, we've got another one to try here, which is basically like that. So this is something we made on 11/11/11 at our friend Angelina's birthday party, and it's another one with D47. And so I was leaving here right around New Year's, but I wanted to have some of this stuff already in a bottle. So I went ahead and bottled it, but there was like about 3% sweetness that was left in there at that point in time. And since then, we've bottled more of it, and now there's 1% sweetness. But, you know, they're both, like, I think, got their own place. And this is, like, a favorite thing that's been crafted, I think, in the area. So, because I bottled it while it was sweet and still viable to eat more of that sweetness, it's going to be a little bit sparkling, like a rosé, champagne type thing.
And when did you bottle that?
I think we bottled it right before, 12/22, 11/11.